So I'm delighted to welcome Fiona Young from Carve AI to the UK AI podcast today, and I'm really looking forward to this. So Fiona, we've known each other for many years. I've been following what you've been doing, but just for our audience, could you explain a little bit about what Carve AI is and introduce yourself and tell us a bit more?
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me. So, Carve is really a learning business that's all about training the world's top executive assistants on AI. So, practically, how to use AI every day. And we're doing that through our signature course, Carve AI, and also through tailored team training.
And what sort of inspired you to really get started with Carve? And what's decided? How did you decide to sort of bring AI into what you're doing?
Yeah, such a great question. So I started this business back in late 2022, right around the time that ChatGPT launched. And at the time, I thought that I was going to build up leadership programs for EAs. I have 13 years of experience in corporate L&D, specialized in leadership development specifically. And before that, I started my career as an executive assistant. And I kind of thought, I really am passionate about this role, EAs. I feel like EAs are undervalued and underinvested in when it comes to learning. And I want to change that. I want to build best in class leadership programs essentially for EAs to help them progress in their careers and raise the ceiling on this role was always my vision. So I set out in late 2022 with this thought that I was going to be building leadership programs for EAs. And of course, ChatGPT was launched. I became completely obsessed with it. And in my discovery work and in my conversations with both EAs and execs, it really just hit me like a load of bricks one day. Oh my gosh, AI is the answer. Actually, this is what EAs need in order to raise the ceiling, in order to progress in their careers. Because great execs are saying, yeah, of course, every great EA I've ever had, I want to help them progress. Of course I do. But sorry, my hands are tied. I need you to manage my calendar. I need you to manage my inbox. I need you to book travel, these sort of base level admin that no one loves to do. Right. So I thought, well, hey, if we can get EAs really on the cutting edge here, adopting AI, it takes away that layer of sort of base level repeatable admin and allows for more capacity to do more of the strategic work, more of the project based work to essentially support execs with more.
And how much of that is upskilling an EA to have the confidence and the skills, or how much of it is actually just and allowing them to discover the right tools to enhance the productivity?
It's really both. I think confidence is a big part of it, and adopting that mindset of curiosity and experimentation. And, I'm not going to break anything here. So let me just go in and try some stuff out and go through that messy and chaotic process of figuring out what's going to work for me. Right. So I think empowering people with that is a really big piece of it. But for sure, knowing the tools and also building the skills to use these tools. And, specifically as we think about LLMs, we're talking about, of course, user level prompt engineering, right? That is the major skill right now that people need to deeply understand. And so helping folks to understand that, and then also the broader AI tool stack for work. What is actually possible right now? And also what is not possible right now, or what is frankly half baked right now. And a lot of these tools, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of froth in the market. And oftentimes they're not all that they're sort of cracked up to be, right? And you watch these demos from tech companies and it all looks fabulous and great. And when you actually get there under the hood, it's like, oh yeah, this really can't replace me. This is not doing human level work in this space yet, right? So it's helping navigate through that and continue to encourage folks to experiment.
I think that's a really important point you raised there about sort of almost managing those expectations, because there are so many people who refer to AI as being a bit like magic, right? But the problem then is that if you expect it to be able to do everything and it can't yet, then you're going to have those expectations dashed, and that can sort of undermine what you can actually achieve. But I mean, you said you started up, I think, in 2022. That's actually quite a long time in sort of AI space, isn't it? So
Yeah.
what have you seen change, and how have you kept up with how things have changed over that period?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have found for sure that way back when I first launched my Carve AI course, which was 2 years ago now, that companies, organizations were really not had not yet figured out what is our AI policy here, what is the tool stack that we're going to give to people, and so there was actually, in a lot of ways, there was a lot more freedom for EAs to explore and experiment. And I should mention the EAs that are my clients tend to be C-suite and founder level EAs. So these are people who do have quite a lot of power in terms of determining the tool stack that they're using day to day, depending a bit, of course, on the organization that they're in and the size and so forth, and data security and privacy and infosec policies and all that. Um, but so back then, there was a lot more freedom to actually, I want to go try out no code automation. I'm going to go and I'm going to get Zapier, and I'm going to build some workflows for myself and I'm going to see if this will work for me and how can I bring this into our exec operations here. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen, of course, organizations choosing a camp. Okay, we're going to go after enterprise ChatGPT, or okay, we are deeply embedded in Microsoft. We're going to take on Copilot as an organization, and shutting the door to the opportunity to experiment with other tools. Totally understandable why that is, by the way. So no judgment there, but it's just the reality of the situation. I think as well that, as folks have become more comfortable and confident with AI, there's a real curiosity to deeply understand use cases. So I think, folks I'm working with day to day are really tired of the intro to AI sessions they've been getting, the sort of generic training that's oftentimes, it's led by a well-meaning IT person in their organization. Okay, I'm going to teach you, about Copilot. This is your intro to Copilot session, and it's a bit of a what is AI, a bit on risk, and throw in, a couple demos and screen shares of what's possible in Copilot right now. And the problem is only about 5% of a session like that is actually practical and relevant for, an everyday EA, for instance, or really any person in an organization. And so what folks are really hungry for and curious for are really specific, role specific use cases. So tell me specifically, how can I use AI and where are the real time savings? Because again, like we mentioned before, this isn't magic, right? And I think there's a bit of a, as you go into the world, you have an initial sort of trough of discontent where it's like, oh gosh, this isn't magic.
Yeah.
Oh, how is it actually going to help me? And that's where you really need the learning and the training to step up and step in and say, for your role specifically, these are the 8 ways that people like you are getting serious efficiencies, right? Let me walk you through these. Let me break this down. Now you're going to try it, right? And with the support, with the feedback in
Mm.
a great training environment to build the confidence and to build a really deep understanding of those use cases. So I say those are the two main things that I'm seeing really shift over time in terms of needs of people and also where organizations are at right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think what you were saying there about having the support of peers and people who've gone through this experience is so important. If you're trying to do it by yourself, you don't know what good looks like. You don't know it's okay to fail. You kind of feel quite vulnerable taking those risks. But when you start to put yourself into a community, you can actually then realize that other people have gone through those same mistakes and they've got through it okay. And there's that support network. Um, I think the other thing you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, was around how, well, some of the case studies that allow people to actually sort of understand how this works. Could you maybe share a really powerful story of how EAs have actually been able to use some of these technologies to transform their productivity?
Yeah, I'd love to share a couple with you, actually. I'd say the first one that, I mean, resonates so deeply with me. So you'll know, of course, because we used to work for the same venture group, that when I started my career, I was EA to a VC founder. And this is the person who, at any given time, chaired between 10 and 20 different companies and charities. And I was responsible for minuting most of the board meetings for those organizations. And so what that meant in practice was literally every week I was in a board meeting that I had to take minutes for, on top of a super busy, crazy, chaotic role, right? And minutes were always the last thing on my to-do list, the thing that I put off more than anything else, because it's just, it is admin drudgery, right? Interesting sitting in meetings, yes. Not so interesting trying to write up, in a formal minute style, kind of capture the meeting. And I think this is one of the most powerful and transformative use cases for EAs now, is that of course, as a human, you still want to be in the meeting probably for an important meeting like this. But by recording the meeting, whether it's virtual or face to face, and being able to create a clean transcript using a tool like Rev, perhaps, unless you're using another AI meeting note taker in your business, you can then take that transcript and with a solid prompt, be able to use any AI chatbot to transform it into slick minutes in the space of seconds. Right. And yes, there may be a little bit of, you may need to redact some stuff if there's something extremely sensitive, that you just don't want in these tools to begin with. You may need to find and replace to change out, speaker one into, oh, that's John Doe, or, whatever. Yes, there is still some manual work involved in sense checking that the right things were captured, right? And the right actions, are all assigned appropriately and all that good stuff. But it literally takes a job that used to be easily 3-4 hours of manual work and transforms it into something you can do in under 20 minutes realistically. So that's a huge one. And I think something as well that I'm seeing with the strategic EAs that I'm working with, really senior EAs, is that with AI meeting note takers, they're also able to really quickly get more context on what's going on in the business without having to join every single meeting with their exec. So they're able to really quickly and easily, let me just skim the headlines of this meeting. Okay, great. I know what's going on. Let me go chase that person now. And so in the background, they're able to be a lot more proactive at managing things like meeting follow-ups and pushing forward projects that are being discussed in meetings even when they're not within the room. So I'd say that's the first one. The second one, which I'd say on the far other end of the spectrum, I've had a couple of my clients have actually used AI to start coding. And so I'll give you an example of one who I just think is so impressive. So she works for a well-known public figure in the US, for family office for this public figure. And, they're essentially doing a lot of investing, and so her role is very operational, right? Dealing with a lot of investor relations, investment management, as well as, your average EA type remit. And so one of the jobs that she would have to do again and again, anytime, an investment opportunity came up, she would have to check that against their existing investments for any conflicts of interest. And so she was doing this previously using a giant spreadsheet, right? And querying it and then also double checking, kind of combing through, because they have hundreds and hundreds of different investments. And they're getting a huge amount of sort of pitches and proposals for potential investments every day. So this was a hugely manual and time-consuming process. So she came onto my course, she got quite inspired by this idea of, could I use ChatGPT for this, right? How could I build maybe custom GPT, some sort of an assistant to do this? So she started asking ChatGPT, help me to build this. How can you do this? She at first was like, let me just upload data, right? Let me upload the spreadsheet, see if I can just query it using ChatGPT. And it kind of ground to a halt. I think it was too much data for it to really, consider in its responses. And so ultimately, she said to ChatGPT, well, help me. Like, what is another way that I can tackle this? And ChatGPT came back and said, well, I can help you write a Python script so that you can go and build a bespoke tool to do this. And she was like, what's Python?
Yeah.
She got a good description. Okay, how can I download this? Okay, how can I, she literally, and she spent hours on this. So she admitted to me, okay, this probably took me 3 to 4 hours to actually build the thing, right? But she built this tool, which she estimates is going to save her literally weeks of time every year, which is incredible, And previously, as someone who had never coded before, of course, she never would have been able to do this without the support of AI. And it still is, it's a huge investment up front. It takes a person like her who is super curious and wants to go after solving this
Mm.
problem, right? To be able to do this in the first place. But I just think it's so incredible to see what a huge difference this can make to how you're working day to day, if you're willing to put in the time, right? And invest the time in learning and in building.
I love that story. That's so great because, as you say, it comes from that curiosity that she had, but also then the ChatGPT in this instance has empowered her. and it's given her the confidence to try new things, and to probably, I imagine, in those hours that she spent on it, made a few mistakes, but it gave her the confidence to be able to figure out the mistakes and then kind of actually build something which now she's got out there, and that will give her even more confidence. So it's a very powerful example of how that can work. So within the workplace, obviously there's some great examples of this really working, but I think it's also interesting to learn from what people are getting wrong. And you must sort of see some of the mistakes, not in terms of, kind of ending the whole process, but it's mistakes that we can learn from. So what are some of the mistakes that you're seeing people are making?
Yeah, I mean, I think more broadly, like from a learning perspective, as a kind of, my background is in L&D. I think one of the big struggles I'm seeing is just, and I kind of voiced this earlier actually, is this treating the learning need as though, okay, we can solve this with a generic one-off training on a tool. Okay, come, we're going to bring in this session on how to use Copilot, and it's super generic. And anytime you have really generic learning like that, it's not actually relevant to anyone if it's not specifically tailored to one audience. So I think there's, the way that training is being applied is really deeply flawed. And I think as well that when you think about, a lot of organizations are thinking about, I think, data security risk, which is obviously super important, right? And especially with the EAs, like obviously EAs are masters of discretion, are dealing with some of the most sensitive data in organizations. Of course, it's important to deeply understand those risks and to mitigate against those risks. But I think we're not talking about one other major risk out there with, AI policy and regulation in businesses, which is that by occasionally, in some situations I can think of, um, companies are being ultra protective about what people can and can't use. And they're actually clipping the wings of their top performers. And I personally have 4 clients I can think of off the top of my head who are top performing EAs who have literally left their jobs, who've left their companies because they didn't have access to the top tools. And they're saying to me, Fiona, like, your course opened my eyes to what's possible. And I realized I can't be at the top of my game working for this company because I'm stuck using not, suboptimal tools here. And I just know that I'm going to slip behind, and I want to be the absolute, I want to be the top 1% of EAs in the world. Right. And I think that's something that we're not thinking about is, and I'm certainly seeing with shadow IT, right? Folks are going out and just using tools anyway because they're not
Mm,
getting access to
yeah.
what they need. So I think there's a real balance here. And I know this exists as well when we think about, at a higher level when it comes to government regulations too, something you're thinking a lot about. But there's a real tension between, mitigating against risk and getting the regs right versus innovation and really empowering people to play and to use the best tools at their fingertips. Um, so I would say as well, another struggle that I'm seeing, another kind of mistake, I guess, on a more individual level, is that the busiest people I'm working with are oftentimes the least likely to invest the time in learning because they're just like, I'm just so busy trying to stay afloat with my current workload. But ironically, they're the ones that would benefit the most
Mm,
from some support from AI, from being able to outsource stuff, from automating some of these workflows, right? And so it's frustrating as a sort of teacher in this, as a trainer in this, because occasionally I say every cohort I do, which is 25, 30 people come along to each cohort. Every cohort there will be one person who, oftentimes working for a VIP, a celeb, et cetera, and genuinely I get it, they are working 60 to 80 hour weeks, like I do understand that, but it's kind of a shame to see them drop out and say, listen, could I defer my place, I can't dedicate the time, right? And it's like, I'm literally in pain for you because I feel like I have the answer here, I have the answer that will literally save you on average, from my alum surveys at least, will save you 4 hours per week, right? But you need to invest a couple hours per week for a period of 6 to 8 weeks to be able to get those efficiencies. So it's sort of a, you're stuck in this chicken and egg thing. And so I think really making the time and And by the way, that comes down to, in a lot of ways, it comes down to the culture of the organization too. It's not just on individuals, it's about their executives and the broader learning culture of the organization, I think, to really allow folks the headspace and the time to dive into AI, to dive into the learning, do the learning they need to get the efficiencies.
Yeah, let's talk about the culture a little bit as well, because I think the culture is so important. And that's really what defines whether there is going to be that mindset that is going to be willing to make mistakes and learn from them, as well as being humble and being curious. But that's sort of something, culture is often very hard to define in an organization. It's very hard to change. But maybe you can sort of share some examples of where you've seen the culture um, helping the process, and what
Yeah.
separates the fast learners from the rest.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I think about culture, I would always boil it down to being a combination of shared values and shared behaviors. I think that's the simplest definition that I've heard of organizational culture. And so, thinking about, have we as an organization really set out our values around innovation, around efficiency, around constant learning and unlearning? I think that's something, by the way, people aren't talking enough about. It's not just about learning the tools, learning the skills, learning the frameworks and experimentation. It's also unlearning the way you've always done things, right? Oh, every time I go to, write this report, I'm going to open up a Word doc and I'm going to start structuring, header by header. Like, no, maybe the way to start is actually to pull a couple you've done before and to build an AI assistant out to help you create that report in a matter of seconds every time you have to do it from here on out, right? So it's kind of trying to build systems and really rethink how you work rather than diving into how you've always done things. So I'd say that's kind of from the value side. And then from the behavior side, there's so many layers to this, right? Obviously, as an L&D person, I always think about how you're helping people to learn the right stuff, really practical, really actionable, and the skills to go alongside it, as well as encouraging practice, experimentation, knowledge sharing, etc. So I think that those are the kind of two sides to the coin of learning culture. And I think for sure the organizations who are getting it right are really encouraging that experimentation and knowledge sharing. And so I'm seeing this play out in a few different ways. I think the big one is really by creating these kind of AI steer codes, creating internal, peer-led, employee-led groups that are really driving the change, because you need it to be both top down, so top down would be the sort of the tone from the top, the sort of, oh, these are our values around AI, this is our, our guidelines around AI. All of that is all good and important for sure, and showcasing how leaders are using this stuff. But I think the sort of bottom up or the grassroots approach is also really, really important here, to get everyday people talking about, well, what worked for me or what didn't work for me, and how can I share this more broadly, and how could we create, a bit of a, whether it's a regular event series or just a place, a shared drive where we're sharing some of the best practices, we're sharing prompts, we're sharing use cases to inspire others. I think that both are really, really important. And that's what I'm seeing from, for sure, the best organizations. I think where, on the flip side, where I'm seeing companies really squash interest in AI, it's typically around this really persistent myth that using AI is like cheating, right? And I'm hearing from folks as well that sometimes there's not a real desire to share about using AI, because people think, oh well, shoot, this report that used to take me, I used to
Yeah,
spend half a day on, carefully crafting and creating graphs and charts and all this great stuff. Gosh, I don't want anyone to know it just took me 20 minutes, because what does that mean about me and my role and sort of my future in this organization? So there's a bit of this kind of fear, right, of
yeah,
getting caught out. Fear people will think it's cheating, or fear that I'll get caught out for, actually I'm kind of a fraud because, you're not going to need me in this role, right? And that's that deep-seated fear I think all of us as knowledge workers have. What does this mean for us? Is this going to automate us all out of jobs, right? So I think organizations need to really counteract that by, again, both the tone from the top and at the grassroots by really sharing, no, this is great. This, we want to be doing things more efficiently. We want to be innovating, and also encouraging sharing of failure, which you mentioned, just a second ago in your question. Like, I think that's so important, right? To be showcasing and talking openly about things that aren't working. And,
Mm.
remember, this isn't magic. This isn't always going to work out. This isn't always going to save you heaps of time the first time you try it. That's okay. Keep going, right? You might fail. You might have an embarrassing moment, where you've forgotten in something that you've put in a document, you've included the little, words from ChatGPT or whatever that are like, how does that sound? Would you like me to expand on any bits of this? Or, that kind of give it away that you used AI. Well, okay, you're human, right? But we're using this tool to help us go faster. And that's only a good thing. And let's have a laugh about it. And let's recognize, we're all on this journey together.
And I think that's where the value of having that community, your cohorts, other people going through this
Yeah.
process is really valuable, right? Because then you could share those, have a laugh about it, like you say. The other thing I kind of thought was really interesting was that fear of cheating, because that is really a big source of friction, right, from young people right through to professionals. Everyone's going to got still in this mindset. It will change, but it's changing slowly. But
Yeah.
I think that is the thing that people. Someone brought me something the other day, and they were almost a little bit embarrassed to say, oh, I've used ChatGPT on this. I'm like, well, we are UK AI. I use it all the time, And there was that crazy thing where the newspapers were sort of criticizing the government ministers for using ChatGPT, and it's like, well, they should be using it. Of course, they should be using it. So I think there's this big sort of hump we need to get over in society where we actually kind of realize that it's okay to use it, but it has a certain role and it still needs human sort of oversight and that sort of layer on top. Um,
For
but
sure.
the other thing I thought was really interesting you were talking about was the role of the EA in the organization, because there is a unique position which EAs hold where
Mhm.
they're able to influence both the senior management but also the organization. And that's a pivotal role when it comes to AI, because you can also then showcase and champion what it is to use AI in a thought out and productive way. So I wonder whether you could just kind of give us some examples of how you're seeing AI transform the role of EAs in those sort of pivotal roles to shape then the organization.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a great question. And it is, for sure, it's such a critical role because, oftentimes EAs are tasked with essentially being tech support for their executives, and particularly when you look at kind of board level as well. Oftentimes these are execs and non-execs who are, let's say, of an older generation than ours. And so, they are day to day really tasked with being that kind of let me help you learn person for execs. Um, but I think as well, EAs, unlike almost any role in an organization, are working across organizations literally with people at every level. And that's really powerful. They are really powerful, quiet change agents, right? And so I have seen that many of my EA clients have stepped into this role of really being a change agent, right? Of beginning either starting their own AI steercos or clubbing together with IT to try to build out, okay, how are we actually helping people move through this change? What are the stages of this change, right? Thinking from a really high level to craft what this journey looks like for their organization, which is absolutely critical. I mean, there are so many white papers and reports out there about this urgent need to upskill and to reskill people. And certainly what we're seeing for EAs themselves is, what I predicted that, back 2.5 years ago is really playing out now. And it's really exciting because I feel like when I started, I was sort of like screaming into the abyss, like, this is going to change the role. This is going to raise the ceiling, and I was like kind of praying that this was going to happen, right? And it is happening. So a lot of EAs are taking the skills that they have learned, not only just sharing them with their execs, with the teams around them, but also using those time efficiencies to be able to take on more. So to say, actually, I noticed that the exec team isn't communicating really effectively together. We've got a lot of silos going on. Let me step into the role of trying to massage through these miscommunications and actually become like a chief of staff type role within this exec team, for instance. So they're starting to look at executive operations more widely rather than just support for one or maybe two execs individually. And so taking on that more strategic, broader role, which is really exciting because it's genuinely value add for their, I don't think I've ever met an exec who would like less support or who feels like they have all the support they need, right? So they're able to step into an even more valuable and powerful and strategic role for the organization.
Yeah, that's really it's good to hear, because I think organizations need agents of change. I love that phrase,
Mhm.
EAs as agents of change for but I think that what AI is doing here, not only is it making EAs more productive and effective, but it's also serving as a reason for EAs to then be able to have to engage with the broader organization because of their unique position. They can actually, as you've highlighted, bring in these programs to affect that change. We're going to have to start to wrap things up, I'm afraid. I'm loving hearing all these amazing examples of how you're using AI to actually can create change here. But just to wrap things up, can you tell us how we can stay in touch with Carve AI and find out more if we want to?
Absolutely. So definitely check out joincarve.com, my website. I do also have a fabulous newsletter called the Carve Edge, which you can subscribe to. And it's it is not a normal newsletter. It is learning content. So every edition is a piece of learning content that will help you use AI more effectively. And I also do have several free guides you can find out about. Probably the easiest way is by following me on LinkedIn. So Fiona Young, Carve. If you type that in, I should be the first result you see. And it's been absolutely lovely chatting with you, Tim. I so appreciate you taking the time out. Always a pleasure catching up.
Likewise, and I love your energy and passion for this, Fiona, as well. And it's so exciting to have seen how your business has grown, and going from yelling into the abyss, as you put it, years back, to where you are now, and so really sort of driving that change as the industry's grown. So I've loved talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.